It's been 10 years since Russia annexed Crimea, and over 2 years since the start of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. Presently, Russia occupies about 18% of contested Ukrainian territory. Russia has received widespread condemnation for its actions, including accusations of war crimes and attacking of civilian infrastructure. Today, we ask the question, does Russia have good cause to invade Ukraine? And helping us dig a little deeper into this topic is political commentator Radiny Volkov. Radiny, you have expressed support for Russia's actions. Can you explain why?
Let's go back to the beginning. Why did Ukraine fall out with Russia? Two countries, which shared the same language, traveled freely, traded and enjoyed each other's lands. In January 2012, statistics show that the attitude of Ukrainian citizens towards Russia was 86% good. Yet by June 2015, the good rating had reduced to just 21%. Within that time frame, two things had occurred. Firstly, a government coup, known as the Maidan Revolution, caused a change of government in Kiev. And there are two aspects to that forced change of government. It was a revolution incited by what Putin refers to as the Western authors of the anti-Russia project. Secondly, the change of government and the whole anti-Russia project was rejected by millions of Ukrainians. In other words, Ukraine was divided. It's like people in Scotland having a different opinion to people in England, or people in Texas having a different opinion to people in California. In Crimea and the southeast of Ukraine, civilians were labeled as separatists and terrorists. It seemed that free speech was not something the Maidan revolutionaries were prepared to allow. They were threatened with military force. So the residents of Donetsk and Lugansk attempted to defend themselves. In Odessa, on 2nd of May 2014, 48 people were burned to death trying to escape neo-Nazi, pro-unity groups.
Okay, well, let me take you up on a couple of points there. You say neo-Nazi, but that isn't true, is it? How do you know that the people involved in the Odessa fire were neo-Nazis? It's quite a confrontational way of describing normal Ukrainian citizens.
I accept that the Maidan Revolution included a diverse coalition of Ukrainians. Amongst these were, for example, the Right Sector, a far-right nationalist organization. If you refer to Wikipedia, I say Wikipedia because it is a San Francisco-based organization. It states that the Right Sector was one of the main actors in the 2014 Hrushevsky-Ho street riots, part of the Euromaidan protests. This group encouraged members to bring Molotov cocktails and bombs. The Right Sector is described as the most effective of the Euromaidan forces in confronting police. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported anti-Semitic incidents involving Right Sector and Svoboda, another right-wing group. It also reported flags with neo-Nazi symbols and distribution of Hitler's Mein Kampf in Independence Square. So, don't believe me, just check with Wikipedia. I feel use of the words Nazi or neo-Nazi are quite applicable in terms of subsequent demonstrations throughout the country.
You say that the residents of Donetsk and Lugansk were threatened with military force after the Maidan Revolution. Do you have any evidence of that?
Yes, for example, non-governmental organizations such as Amnesty International raised concerns about some Ukrainian volunteer battalions. They were described as renegade gangs implicated in torture, abductions, and summary executions. A report in March 2016 by the United Nations Human Rights Commission noted reports of violations such as enforced disappearances, detention, torture, and ill-treatment by elements of the security service of Ukraine. You can confirm all of this and more in Wikipedia.
But what you say about the West's anti-Russian project, that's all conspiracy theory, isn't it? It's poppycock. There's no truth in any of it.
Do you think that the idea of spies and of subversion of countries only exists in James Bond movies and the minds of paranoid Americans? It's real. And I don't know where to start to explain this reality.
Perhaps you have some concrete evidence of just one case.
Well, my friend, why don't you look at the 2022 article by Becky Little describing how 10 times America helped overthrow a foreign government? In the 1860s, U.S. intervention in foreign governments began with attacks and displacement of sovereign tribal nations in North America. The list goes on. The well-documented Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba under President Kennedy. 1953, Iran. 1954 Guatemala, 1960 the Congo, 1963 Vietnam. 1973, Chile, 1981 Nicaragua, 2001 Afghanistan. 2003, Iraq. Are you so naive to imagine that the US played no part in the change of government in Ukraine?
But you're just harking back to historical events. These have no bearing on what's happening in Ukraine today.
No bearing? That's a complete joke. It shines a light on the US mentality of systematic interference that dates back to the earliest days of its constitution. It is a character which beats its chest and declares to mankind, "We are the best, our way of living is the best, and everywhere we can in the world, we will strive to impose our way of life on others, regardless of whether they want it or not." Indirectly, it's always indirectly with America, they have fueled the idea of NATO expansion in Europe, proffered the carrot of EU membership, promoted Russophobia, and attempted to denigrate every aspect of Russian life.
But you're just saying that. I ask again, where is your proof of this?
Okay. After this interview, go home and look up on the internet, the NED. The National Endowment for Democracy. The blurb blatantly declares, quote, "Each year, NED makes more than 2,000 grants to support the projects of non-governmental groups abroad who are working for democratic goals in more than 100 countries. This is a government-funded project, supported by the CIA, which causes untold damage and disruption to communities all around the world." In 2019, this body received $196 million from the US government. Mysteriously, details on Ukraine were wiped from the NED website at the start of the Russian invasion in 2022. This was part of a systematic attempt by the CIA to hide their actions, including editing and deleting Wikipedia pages. On the deleted Wikipedia page, the sum of $100 million was shown as funding to Ukraine. That is more than half the entire budget of the NED. By the way, the NED board includes 7 former US ambassadors. And I should add that Traynor, a journalist from The Guardian, further identified the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute, the US State Department, USAID, the Freedom House NGO, and billionaire George Soros's Open Society Institute as backers of the regime change. US geopolitical expert Friedman described Ukraine as the most blatant coup in history. And, just to underline this point, US Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland herself participated in the Maidan protests. And who else? Well, Senator John McCain was there, and other US officials. Obviously, both gloating over the culmination of a successful US project. So please don't tell me this is all imagination and conspiracy. It's documented, it's on video, and it's in print. Where it isn't is in the US, UK, and EU mainstream news.
Okay, if we do accept that covert operations by the US government promoted or at least contributed to the overthrow of the government in Ukraine, at the end of the day, what's wrong with that? Western governments have to counter the Russian threat, don't they?
Well, that is exactly the kind of mentality that has got the world into this mess. The Russians do not pose a threat to either Europe or the US. Do you think they need more land? Since Putin took power in 1999, there has been no record of Russia attempting to expand the area of land they already have, let alone threatening Europe or America. There is no policy of expansionism. In fact, Putin is on record as declaring he has no intention of attempting to expand Russia. This is just American and European paranoia and hysterics, which suits their storyline and dates right back to before the 1950s.
So, paranoia, hysterics, Russophobia, But wouldn't Ukraine be better off under the protection of NATO and within the European Union?
Who are you, or I, or America, or anyone to say what is good or not for another country? So the logic goes something like this. I don't like the way your country is run, so I am going to try to change your government. Ukraine had a democratically elected president. Elected with over 48% of the popular vote. I already explained how $100 million from the NED went towards destabilizing Ukraine. The mission statement of NED is, quote, to foster the growth of a wide range of democratic institutions abroad. So, what, can you tell me, is the NED and the other US bodies doing, bringing down a democratically elected government and putting Ukraine in an impossible position with its hitherto friendly neighbor, Russia?
But really, wasn't Yanukovych just a Putin puppet, like Lukashenko?
Not at all. As I mentioned, Yanukovych was democratically and freely elected due to known abuses of the voting process. Lukashenko was not. If we go back to 2010 in Ukraine, President Yanukovych was accused of pandering to the Russians. He had just agreed an extension of the lease of Sevastopol naval base to Russia, and opponents criticized him for pandering to Russian demands. But the deal also allowed for cheap gas to Ukraine from Russia. It is documented that Yanukovych resisted some Ukrainian deputies' attempts to integrate further with Russia. Forget about it, forever, he had shouted. Instead, he argued to deepen trade with the European Union. These facts you will find in a 2019 book called Ukraine and Russia: From Civilized Divorce to Uncivil War, by political scientist Paul Dianieri. The book details how Yanukovych trod a balanced line between the EU and Russia. Ukraine was a neutral country, having good relations with both Russia and the EU. Of course, Ukraine had its problems such as corruption, but it was a country finding its feet. And then the Maidan Revolution occurred, thanks to Western interference, principally from the USA. So, all we have seen here is a peaceful and neutral country, decimated and driven into war due to external influence. It's a travesty, it's a disaster, and it's basically all down to the USA. They are the aggressors in this conflict.
I follow that, but the question is, why did Russia wait until February 2022 to cross into Ukraine and formally liberate the large swathes of southern Ukraine?
Ukraine is a brother of Russia. There are many intermarriages, and families always moved with ease between the two countries. Going back to 1994, a referendum took place in the Donetsk Oblast and the Luhansk Oblast, with around 90% supporting the Russian language gaining status as an official language alongside Ukrainian, but it was ignored by parliament. Even President Zelensky's first language is Russian. And yet now they pull down statues of Tolstoy. According to Berlin's ZOS study in 2019, only 3.5% of inhabitants of the Russian separatist areas said that Ukrainian was their mother tongue. As Putin wrote in 2020, today, the right patriot of Ukraine is only the one who hates Russia. Moreover, the entire Ukrainian statehood is proposed to be further built exclusively on hate and anger. So, far from Russia being expansionist in nature, it was the imminent threat of NATO expansion into Ukraine and the threat of Western military forces on its border that was taken as a direct threat to Russia's security and sphere of influence. Its Black Sea Fleet has forever been based in Sevastopol. On the 19th of February, Zelensky made a speech at the Munich Security Conference, calling for Western powers to drop their policy of appeasement towards Moscow and state a clear time frame for when Ukraine could join NATO. And so, with no hope of an agreement, on the 21st of February, Putin formally recognized the Russian-controlled territories of Ukraine as independent states, that is, the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. And on the 24th of February, 2022, the occupation began. Putin said the operation was to protect the people of the Russian-controlled breakaway republics. He stated that they had been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kiev regime. As has already been mentioned, Amnesty International and the UN Human Rights Commission noted such abuses in 2016.
Thank you, Radini, for your very concise answers. So, we have heard the point of view of one Russian supporter, but what do you think? Does he have any valid points? That's all for today. Goodbye.